Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're digging into a sermon from just yesterday, May 4th, 2025. It was given by Pastor Rusty at Central Baptist Church, Boona.
That's right. We're using the YouTube recording of the service as our source material.
And Pastor Rusty, he's been going through 1 Timothy for a few weeks now.
Yeah, and this particular message focused right in on chapter 6, specifically verses 3 through 10, and then he jumped ahead a bit to verses 17 through 19.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack what Pastor Rusty was getting at. We want to look at his thoughts on false teaching, where that comes from.
The dangers of being discontent, which seems like a big theme.
Definitely. And then, what's the path to finding real contentment, what he called true life. We'll follow his arguments, look at the scriptures he used.
Sounds good.
All right, so he kicked things off talking about false teaching. What was the main thrust there?
Well, what struck me immediately was his focus. He pointed out that when Paul warns Timothy about false teachers, Paul isn't primarily concerned with, the exact bad information they're spreading.
Oh, interesting. So not just the what, but the why.
Exactly. Pastor Rusty really emphasized that Paul drills down to the sinful heart, the unhealthy motivations behind the teaching. It's less about an intellectual mistake, and more about a spiritual problem.
Right. And he listed those characteristics Paul mentions in 1 Timothy 6, being conceited, understanding nothing.
Having that unhealthy interest in quarrels and disputes about words.
Yeah, and the fallout from that envy is strife, slander, evil suspicions, constant friction. It just sounds exhausting and, toxic.
It really does. And then Pastor Rusty did something I thought was pretty relevant. He drew a line from those ancient problems to things we see today.
How so?
He brought up figures like, shock jocks, certain cable news personalities, even some YouTube channels or podcasts.
The ones who seem to thrive on controversy.
Precisely. Those who stir the pot, generate outrage, maybe gain followers or financial benefit from all that attention. He noted people are sort of drawn to that.
Yeah. That makes sense. And he even shared a personal story, didn't he, from around 2020?
He did. He mentioned a time when his church started addressing specific cultural topics on Wednesday nights, looking at them biblically.
And attendance went up.
Noticeably, yeah. He used it to illustrate how tempting it can be, even for pastors, to focus on those hot-button issues because, they get a reaction. They boost engagement.
It's a real pressure, I imagine. Keep people interested.
And he gave another quite specific example. He mentioned a well-known pastor who apparently spent a good chunk of a sermon talking about that Chinese spy balloon incident.
Oh, okay.
Pastor Rusty sort of questioned, how directly relevant is that to biblical teaching? But he also observed that pastors' prominence seemed to increase around that time.
So it raises questions about focus. What are we feeding ourselves spiritually versus just reacting to the news cycle?
Exactly. And he wasn't shy about calling out what he sees as a human tendency, this unhealthy craving for controversy.
He even mentioned the local Boona Facebook pages, didn't he? As an example of how people can get drawn into drama.
Yeah, a little lighthearted local example, but then he made a really key clarification that the controversies Paul was addressing in Ephesus, back when he wrote to Timothy, they weren't really political fights or community gossip.
Ah, so what were they then?
Primarily theological. Big questions about the gospel itself. How does it apply to Gentiles? How should Jewish theology be understood now? Things like that. Deep doctrinal stuff.
Okay, that context is important. It wasn't just arguing for arguing's sake about everyday things.
Right, and that led him to what Paul identifies as the root motivation for these false teachers in verse 5. Pastor Rusty quoted it directly. They imagine that godliness is a way to material gain.
Wow. So using faith as a cover for wanting money and stuff.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Driven by this deep discontentment and desire for wealth. It's about personal gain disguised as piety.
That really shifts the perspective. He then made a contrast, didn't he, between building a platform and building the kingdom.
Yes, a really powerful one. Building a platform is often about you, getting attention. Building the kingdom is about God's work, something eternal.
And chasing likes versus making disciples. One is fleeting, the other has lasting impact.
Exactly. So that whole section really set the stage for the next big topic.
Which was discontentment itself. He transitioned from false teachers using godliness for gain to how discontentment affects, all of us.
Yeah, he made it clear this isn't just a them problem. Discontentment is something everyone struggles with, and he called it dangerous living.
And he tied it straight to money worries, didn't he? Which I think everyone can relate to, that feeling of, if I just had a bit more, things would be okay.
Totally relatable. We all fall into that trap of thinking more money is the magic solution,
But he brought in Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount.
reminding us how temporary wealth is, how it doesn't truly satisfy. And then he quoted 1 Timothy 6 again. Verse 7 is so stark. We brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out.
It's hard. And verse 9, the warning about those who want to be rich, falling into temptation, into a trap.
It's a serious warning about desire.
He also spent a moment on that often misquoted verse, 1 Timothy 6:10.
Oh, yeah, that's a crucial clarification.
He really stressed it's the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, not the root.
Right, the emphasis is on the love, the misplaced priority. He pointed out money itself isn't the problem, actually. Later in verse 17, Paul says God gives us things to enjoy. Money can be a tool, a gift.
So it's our attitude towards it, our desire for it above other things, that's the danger zone.
Precisely. And Pastor Rusty offered a way to fight that love of money. Two things, really.
What were they?
First, consciously remembering that everything we have is actually God's, it's entrusted to us. And second, actively practicing generosity. Giving it away loosens its grip on us.
That makes sense. Breaking the hold. He then connected this back to verse 19, right? Take hold of what is truly life.
Yeah, he framed overcoming discontentment as rejecting that lie, that more money, more status, more anything external will finally bring satisfaction. True life is found elsewhere.
And this is where he shared that really personal story, walking through his own life.
Oh, that was powerful. So relatable.
He talked about being a kid, thinking middle school would be better than high school,
Yeah.
and going to college,
Sure.
then getting married, starting a career, having kids. At every stage, that feeling that the next thing would be the one, the thing that finally brought lasting contentment.
But it never quite did it? It was always just over the horizon.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrated how we chase these external milestones, thinking they hold the key to happiness, but it's an elusive chase.
And his point was that while we're busy looking ahead, always wanting the next thing,
We can completely miss the biggest blessings we have right now. That discontentment blinds us to the good things already in our lives. That's a sobering thought. So, having shown the danger of discontentment, he then pivoted to the positive. How do we find that true life and contentment?
Right. He set up a contrast. Dangerous discontentment on one side.
And godliness with contentment on the other, which Paul calls great gain in verse 6.
And he defined that true life pretty simply. It's walking with Jesus, finding your contentment in him.
He went back to verse 17 again, didn't he? Don't set your hope on money.
Yes, but on God, who richly provides us with all things to enjoy. And he encouraged listeners to mentally replace money with whatever else they might be putting their hope in.
Like success or approval or even health.
Yeah.
Anything we treat as ultimate.
Exactly. And the key shift he highlighted was setting your hope not just on the blessings, but on the blessings giver, on God himself.
Focusing on the source, not just the gifts. That feels like a fundamental shift.
It really is. He stressed that following Jesus isn't like a strategy to get other things, wealth, health, whatever.
Yeah.
Jesus isn't a means to an end.
He is the end.
He is the end. He's the source of true life itself. If you have him, Pastor Rusty argued, you have everything you truly need for deep, lasting satisfaction.
And to really hammer that home, he used Paul's words from Philippians.
Oh, yeah. Philippians 3. Where Paul says everything else, his background, his achievements, he counts it all as loss, basically garbage.
He uses a pretty strong word there, dung, rubbish.
Yeah, compared to the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, that's a radical reevaluation of what truly matters. That's contentment personified, right?
Absolutely. Then Pastor Rusty used an analogy I thought was really striking. The astroturf pastures.
That was vivid. Things that look green, look appealing, look like they'll satisfy.
But they're fake. They're artificial.
Yeah.
They don't actually provide real nourishment or lasting contentment.
It's a great picture of so many things the world offers us. They look good, but they leave us empty.
And he tied that directly to our daily lives, how marketing constantly works to make us feel discontent.
Constantly telling us we need this new thing or that experience to finally be happy. It fuels that cycle.
So what was his counter advice?
To resist that pull, to be present. He literally said, be where your feet are. Find contentment right here, right now, grounded in the truth that Jesus is with you in this moment.
That's very practical. Did he share another story there?
He did, about a pilot. Someone who dreamed of flying since childhood achieved it.
Lived the dream.
Lived the dream. But then later in life found himself longing for the simple life he had before, just fishing. It showed how circumstances change, But that internal discontentment can just latch onto something new if we're not careful.
So it's not about finding the perfect circumstances.
No, it's about finding the perfect person to walk through all circumstances with.
And his conclusion basically wrapped all that up.
Yeah, bringing it back to the core idea. Jesus is just better than anything the world offers. And the invitation is simply to walk with him today and experience the real blessings, the true life that comes from that relationship. Not chasing tomorrow, but living with him now.
Okay, so if we boil it down, the big takeaway from Pastor Rusty seems to be this: real, lasting contentment. It's not out there somewhere in the next achievement or the next purchase.
No, it's found right here in knowing Jesus, in walking closely with him. That's the source of great gain.
Which leaves us with a pretty challenging thought to chew on, doesn't it? Reflecting on maybe what astroturf pastures might be growing in your own life.
Yeah, what are those things that look good, that promise satisfaction, but might actually be distracting you from the real source?
Things you're relying on instead of that relationship with God, and maybe considering how shifting your focus consciously onto the blessings giver, how that could change everything. Your perspective, your sense of peace.
Your experience of genuine contentment. It's a powerful challenge.
And just a quick note, Pastor Rusty did mention that next week's sermon, focusing on verses 11-16 of 1 Timothy 6, will explore more about what it looks like to actually walk with Jesus day to day.
Sounds like that could be fertile ground for another deep dive down the road.